While the federal government recognizes the second Monday in October as Columbus Day, many states, including Washington, have renamed it Indigenous Peoples Day. Advocates say this is a time to celebrate Native American history and culture, but also to acknowledge the history of dispossession and violence against Indigenous people, especially in places where that history has been all but erased. Places like Fort Simcoe State Park on the Yakima Reservation. Apple Valley News Now's Emily Goodell has this exclusive report.
About where that sign is.
Fort Simcoe Historical State Park is dedicated to the military fort that stood on the property for 3 years. But archaeologist John Schellenberger says beneath the manufactured lawn hides a history of brutality that lasted for more than 60 years between 1860 and 1922.
So there was 2 dorm buildings, the boys and girls. It's now marked with signage for like lieutenant quarters. So there's no signage whatsoever that this boarding school even existed. The very first on-reservation boarding school happened right here in your backyard, right after a bloody, painful 4-year war.
Hundreds of Yakima children taken from their families by force.
The families would come and camp outside the grounds to be closer, just in the hopes to get a glimpse of them, get some time. My ancestor lost all 5 of his children. He tried to fight them off with an axe. And so they sent him to prison for about 12 years to San Quentin.
Children housed at Fort Simcoe forced to change their names, work hard labor, and abandon their culture.
Part of the effort was to be English into them. And so, yeah, they did awful things, torturous things to them. In order for them not to speak their own language and to actually speak English. If somebody didn't comply, then they would just starve them until they gave up, till they broke them. So yeah, they could be shackled or kept away from folks in detention for unknown periods of time, starving.
In a jail formerly used for prisoners during wartime.
They took great efforts to change us by putting us in these boarding schools and make us not Indians, make us white, Christian, landowning citizens. But by doing that, they were breaking them.
And with thousands of unmarked graves being uncovered at Indian boarding schools across North America, John is looking closer to home.
I wanted answers about this place and I didn't want to wait.
He started in 2020, looking in archives.
Records are scattered. They're in all different places, so it's a real mess.
Mentions found of a cemetery on site, but no location.
We really needed cadaver dogs to guide us towards a beginning place. Like, where do we start? Because it's such a large area.
Now they've brought in technology.
It looks like a lawnmower that married a baby jogger.
It's called ground penetrating radar,
which is essentially like a fish finder for the soil. That's the best way to explain it. It sends out a signal and then it receives a signal. And then that signal bounces off of objects and it receives a signal back telling us there's an object there.
Getting the readings is the easy part.
The hard part is going back and interpreting that data and separating what looks like burials from rock features.
John says efforts like this largely unfunded by the federal government.
There hasn't been any legislation passed. There's a bill that's been introduced for the 3rd time, hoping that it'll get passed.
In the meantime, this effort, run by volunteers and funded by John himself, private donors, and the Share Fund.
This one is also funded by Yakima Women in Trades, because we're working to train BIPOC women, natives, Hispanics, African Americans, those who are interested in being archaeological technicians.
Women like 19-year-old Ilani Ike, who grew up hearing stories about her great-grandmother, a survivor of the boarding school at Fort Simcoe.
That trauma just made her be so afraid of speaking her language again.
But now Ilani is helping others to make sure the voices of boarding school survivors are heard.
It's bigger than just finding unmarked burials. It's about getting answers and starting a healing process for our community. We can grow stronger and know that we survived this. We made it out of it, and we can come back together and make it stronger for our children.
At Fort Simcoe Historical State Park, Emily Goodell, Apple Valley News Now.
There is a federal bill up for consideration right now that would create a Truth and Healing Commission to oversee projects just like this one.